Hi, I'm Elizabeth, this is the Bookish North and another video where I talk about the books that made up my week. So this week I have been actively reading 2 books. I finished both of them, the last one about an hour ago, and then I might have also bought some books that I plan to show you towards the end of the video. If it's very noisy today, it's because it's windy outside, can't change it. Sorry, that's what you're getting. But yeah, let's get to the books. I have a cheat sheet because apparently 3 names are at least too many for me to remember without having the actual book here. But yeah, the first book I finished this week was my audiobook pick, and that's The Girl Who Wrote Loneliness, written by Kyung-Sook Shin, translated from the Korean by Jung, and read by Emily Wu Zeller. So that was all the names. It's a book I started for Women in Translation Month, but it took me a while to finish, and that had nothing to do with the book and everything to do with me falling asleep on my commute rather than listening to audiobooks. Sorry. But yeah, the book was very good. It is an autobiographical novel, or autofic, I guess is the term for that, where we meet a young Korean 16-year-old girl who moves away from her parents in the countryside and into Seoul, where she will share a room with her brother and her cousin, and eventually also another brother. And she will be working all day on a factory, and during the evening she will attend night school, all to achieve her ambition of becoming a writer. But then, in addition to this timeline, we also have sort of the present day time of the book, which is 16 years later when she is 32. She is by then a published writer, and she writes about, well, the process of writing this book. So it is fairly meta at times, but she also just continuously interfere in her own story about her 16-year-old self, and sort of interjecting this adult narrator into that storyline. And at the very beginning I found that a bit annoying, but once I got used to it, I really feel that that is what made this book such a strong novel that I think it is. Part of that is because I think knowing from the beginning that she will actually achieve her ambition helps to read those parts of the book where she is not in a good place, because you know that her suffering and her pain is temporary. So I think that sort of lightens up the harder parts of the book. But it also does other things. It makes the book have more weight, at least for me, because I have to admit I know next to nothing about recent Korean history. I could say that about many countries, but it's certainly true for me and Korea. I think just about the only thing I've read from there has been Human Acts and The Vegetarian by Han Kang. And so the events touched upon in Human Acts are also touched upon here, but just much more in the periphery. Yeah, that was a side note. But yeah, what I think it does, having this adult version of her coming in and interfering with the story of the 16, 17, 18-year-old girl, is that it gives a lot more context, because this 16-year-old girl is fairly naive and innocent. She doesn't really understand all of the things going on around her. So having the adult voice coming in, giving context, makes it easier to get into for a reader like myself. And it also makes it sort of stronger, because you get to understand things that she herself at the time didn't understand. And then the other thing it does is that it gives the book its tension, because it is clear when reading the parts from the present day of the novel, which is in the mid-90s when it was written, is that something happened during those years, something that is traumatic and painful for the narrator, and there is a reason why she is unwilling to talk about this period in her life, and why she is struggling to talk about it even now as she is writing the book. The book at least seems to have been published as a series, because in the second part of the book she also talks about the reception of the first part, and in the third part about the second part, and so on. So it is meta. You get to know a lot about the process of writing the book while reading the book, and I did quite enjoy that. I liked the writing style, I liked how close I felt to the characters, and I liked how vivid these settings are in my mind, even though I've never been to Korea, and I'm sure they're probably very wrong. The writing style is a bit repetitive at times, but I did feel like it made sense in the context of this book. Yeah, I very much enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it if it sounds like something you would enjoy as well. And then the other thing I've been reading this week was something very different from that, and it's Provenance by Leckie, which I picked up for the Space Opera September Challenge. So this is sci-fi. It is, a lot of it at least, is set planet-side, but some of it is set in space as well. There is definitely space travel and space stations and all of that, so I'm saying it counts for that. And I enjoyed this very much as well. I was a bit hesitant going into it just because I love the Ancillary trilogy so much. I know the trilogy actually has a different name, I'm just unable to pronounce it, so I'm calling it Ancillary trilogy. But anyways, this is set after the events of the trilogy, but in a different place in the universe, in a different culture. So you have a lot of new things to learn, and there's a lot of new people, and you don't really need to have read the trilogy at all to be able to enjoy this. This stands very well on its own. So here we meet a young woman called Ingray, who is a foster child in an important family, and she has been taught from a very early age to compete with her brother for becoming heir to the head of the family, her mother. And in this culture you kind of inherit the name of your mother or your parent when you are named heir. And so they are competing for this position. And when we meet Ingray in here, she is in the midst of an elaborate scheme to do something daring and courageous to advance her mother's position, and through that to maybe be able to be named heir. She is pretty certain she won't succeed in that, because everybody knows that her brother will be named heir eventually, but she can't stop trying. And yeah, so she is in the midst of this scheme, and from the get-go it goes wrong. That's not a spoiler, because that's literally the first chapter of the book. And after that, she just have to continuously think on her feet and adapt to how the situation around her change. And it changes again and again and again. And yeah, I was a bit hesitant, as I said, because I love the trilogy so much, and I thought, how can you go on from there and make something else that I would love just as much? But somehow she made it. Well, at least almost. I would probably still say I prefer the trilogy, but this was very good. It was very entertaining. It's an engaging story with interesting characters and a plot that just took me away. And yeah, it was unpredictable, and I liked how it ended. I liked how it all played out. I would say it's probably a bit more straightforward than the other books. All the twists and turns are more related to the plot, and I actually, even though I couldn't anticipate what was going on, I understood it, so I felt way less confused reading this than the ancillary books. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think this was a very good story, and if you like sci-fi, you might want to give this a go as well. So yeah, that was the 2 books I read this week. I have not read a single page in anything else, at least not yet. I will probably do some reading after I film this video. But as I said, I did buy some books, so I thought I'd show you them as well quickly before ending this video. So on Friday I went to Oslo with Silje, and we went to this amazing event which had a great panel discussion about the TV series Buffy the Vampire Slayer that ended with a sing-along with the musical episode. But before we went there, we, being us, went into a bookshop which was Outland, you know, kind of one of those geeky bookshops with sci-fi, fantasy, comics, manga, all that stuff. I love it, so I convinced Silje to go, which isn't very hard because she loves it as well. But I wanted to go because I wanted to buy a copy of my most anticipated release of 2019. And no, I'm not going to show you Margaret Atwood now, but rather A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie, because this is the first book in a new trilogy set in the First Law universe, and the First Law universe is the closest I'll get to ever being a proper fangirl, and I'm so excited about this book. I want to devour it right away, but I also want to save it, because if I read it, I will have read it and there will be another year to wait for something new, so we'll see how soon I'll get to it, but probably within this month at least. And then I also bought 2 sci-fi books while I was there. I bought, what's it called? To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers, because I've read all of the Wayfarer books up until this point, and I love me some cozy sci-fi, which I never thought I would, but apparently I do. So I bought that. And then I also bought The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal, because I really want to read this as well. So those were the books I bought on Friday. And then on Saturday I went to not 1 but 2 flea markets with my brother and his girlfriend. And the only thing I really buy at flea markets are books, but they are cheap, so I mean, I'm allowed to, aren't I? So the first place we went, I bought 2 books. I bought this one. I have forgotten to look up if this is published in English and what the title is. It's in Norwegian, it's called Sjakknovelle by Stefan Zweig. Yeah. I was gonna say what the original title is, but I realized I don't speak German, so Sjakknovelle? I don't know, close enough to the Norwegian title at least. But yeah, I've never read Stefan Zweig, but I have heard good things about him, both from my Norwegian bookish friends and lately also from Mark Nash. So I wanted to give it a go, especially when it costs like €0.50. And then the other book I bought there was a Norwegian one. It's called Bli hvis du kan, Stay If You Can. It's the name of a trilogy. This contains all 3 books. It's by Helga Flatland, which is a Norwegian author I really like. I've read most of her other books apart from this, I think. This is a trilogy that talks about 4 childhood friends who become soldiers going to Afghanistan, and what happens to them and their community when all 4 of them do not return alive from the mission. I've heard great things about this trilogy, and again, I've been nearly buying that at full price so many times, and now when I saw it for, again, less than €1, I couldn't pass on it. And then at the second flea market I also bought 2 books. First of which is What I Loved by Sirius Tvedt, which is a book I have already read. It's on my list of favorite books of all time, but when I read it I had borrowed it from the library, so when I saw this I thought I want my own copy, because this is a book I will want to be reading again. So now I can. I could have just borrowed it at the library again, I'm aware, but I wanted to own it. And then the last book I bought was Jenny by Sigrid Undset, which is a book I've been meaning to read for ages. And again, I could have used the library, but it was there, it was cheap, now I have it. And having it makes it more likely for me to read it sooner rather than later. So that was my week in books. a lot of books bought, somewhat less books read, which seems to be the refrain of my life, my bookish life at least. Hope you're having a good week as well, and until next time, bye bye.